Welcome to Washington in Focus Daily. It is Tuesday, June the 9th, 2026, a blustery day here in Western Washington. I'm Carlene Johnson. Thank you for joining us. In today's episode, it is day 2 of the Legislative Ethics Board hearing with allegations that 23rd District Representative Tarra Simmons may have abused her office and used campaign donations to help out a community organization that she worked for, and another big donation for a group that she allegedly provided so they could hire her boyfriend. It's been a very unusual couple days of that ethics board inquiry. Then the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, has released some new rules for housing first, kind of moving away from that model for addressing the homelessness crisis and moving more to a treatment first and outcomes based approach for states. My colleague Tim Klauser has exclusive details on how Washington State is responding. And then campaign manager and spokesperson for Let's Go Washington, Darren Littell, has some thoughts on the pro and con statements that you're going to see in voters' pamphlets for the two initiatives that are already qualified for the November ballot. These are the initiatives to protect girls in sports and to restore parental rights with school notification. So we now have the names of the folks that are going to be providing those statements. He also has some thoughts on the statements that are going to end up on your actual ballot. Those are crafted for the initiatives by the Attorney General's office, even though the AG's office has come out opposed to both initiatives. So a little bit of that coming up in today's episode of Washington in Focus. So an extremely rare public hearing continues today in Olympia. This is with 23rd District Representative Tarra Simmons, accused of improperly using her office as a lawmaker and some cash from her prior campaign donations to assist two nonprofit organizations, one of which was her employer. The other, she's accused of giving some money to, but only if they hired her boyfriend. So those are the allegations. It's been at least a decade since the Legislative Ethics Board has had a hearing like this, and for 2 days of hearings with a number of allegations she's facing, it is highly unusual. I've been watching it for the last day and a half, and it's been compelling. Some people might think it's kind of nerdy to watch such things, but I found it very interesting. And the complaint that incited the ethics investigation was filed back in 2025, February of 2025, by Kim Gordon, a Seattle attorney and treasurer of one of the groups, the American Equity and Justice Group, that was receiving some of that money that Representative Simmons helped to negotiate for. Now, during the hearing on Monday, Gordon told Assistant Attorney General Julia Eisentraut that when she saw a Facebook post from Representative Simmons with her boyfriend, Antoine Coleman, the person that Simmons allegedly made the donation for so he could get a job, she said when she saw that, she knew there was a potential conflict of interest.
Did this post prompt any action on the part of AEJG?
When I saw that, my immediate step was to contact Anthony. And then Anthony and I immediately began working to schedule the next board meeting, to let the board know what was happening, and to collectively decide what to do.
What, if anything, did the board do?
The board determined there were, by my memory, and I know that I have this in my timeline too, where I summarized the steps the board took, but we determined that there was a potential conflict of interest. We were instructed, I say we, the staff, so myself and Mr. Powers, we were instructed by the board to not cash the $40,000, to decline that donation, to return the $10,000 donation that had previously been made. We were instructed to, with the assistance.
I'm going to have to object. My understanding is the witness was on the board at this time. Is my understanding incorrect?
Ms. Eisentraut, your response to that?
If he's asking the witness a question, he can do that in cross-examination.
Yeah, if, Mr. McKinley, if you do have questions, you're welcome to ask those during cross-examination. You can go ahead and proceed with your direct exam questioning, Ms. Eisentraut.
Let's go back to the board's action. Okay, so as I understand, you've testified that this prompted calling a board meeting and alerting the board based on this post. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. I think the question was, what, if anything, did the board do?
So the board collectively, they decided to reject the $40,000, return the $10,000 with the consultation of employment counsel, take steps to terminate Mr. Coleman's employment.
Objection, hearsay. Who's employment counsel?
Ms. Eisentraut, your response to that objection?
She's allowed to testify to what she knows about the actions the board took.
Now, as the hearing continued today, Representative Simmons took the witness stand with her attorney, asking her about her upbringing and decision to run for office. There was a lot of background. The first probably 40 minutes of her kind of sitting there was just basically talking about, her childhood. And she was tearful in sharing about the abuse that she suffered as a child. And she had her service dog with her on her lap during the hearing, telling the board members that because of emotional issues that she has from childhood, the dog helps to kind of calm her down and helps her to be successful. Now, ultimately, if Simmons is found to be in violation of these ethics rules, she could be fined up to $5,000 per violation, and then also ordered to pay costs for the state AG's office for this basically litigation. It really is run like a trial. She's also up for re-election this November, so it remains to be seen if that will impact her re-election. I did reach out to her opponent. She only has another Democrat running against her, Poulsbo Democrat Daria Ilgen. I may be saying that wrong. Forgive me if I am. I did reach out to his campaign today and asked for a comment and asked if they would speak with me, and I received no response. So again, forgive me if I am pronouncing your name incorrectly. All right, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development is prioritizing housing paired with wraparound services now. Basically telling states, including Washington, if you want to continue to receive federal funding to address the homelessness crisis, you're going to have to prove some outcomes. We're not just going to give you money and you put people who are drug addicted and mentally ill into housing with no expectation of recovery, no expectation that anyone's actually getting well. And my colleague Tim Clauser put up an article today on our Center Square Washington page, which I would highly encourage you to check out. After learning that Washington state officials knew this was coming, it's not been a secret that the Trump administration was moving against the housing first model toward a treatment first model. But Washington state officials told Tim Clauser, my colleague, we've been moving away from this and we are prepared to pivot.
So essentially last year, HUD tried to change the rules attached to its continuum of care program funding, which goes towards homelessness services, permanent shelters, transitional housing, case management, different types of treatment services. And the changes in these grant guidelines sought to end the housing first approach, which has been embraced by the federal government for the last 13 years. And it just essentially prioritizes putting people in taxpayer subsidized housing without any preconditions for sobriety or participation in different support services. When HUD tried to do this last year and the courts blocked it, the state knew that they were going to come back and try to do it again. So the state's been trying to prepare for that in advance. And records that I obtained via public records request show that the state commerce department was actually updating its own request for proposal documents to remove any grant criteria that mentioned housing first. They were rewording equity narrative questions to kind of reflect fair housing laws. They were also adding new content for those transitional housing services and different types of supportive services. The state was preparing for the shifted federal priorities, despite Commerce itself providing a statement to me saying, this new funding availability from the federal government is going to create massive gaps in the state's permanent housing supply that state and local funding just isn't going to be able to supplant. And okay, you could make the argument that it's going to leave deep cuts in the state system, but at the same time, the funding that's at stake through HUD's Continuum of Care program, it's about $80 to $81 million annually for the state. But Commerce has annual data from last year that shows that they spent almost $1 billion on homelessness in 2025. $80 million from HUD's Continuum of Care program is just a small piece of that $1 billion pie that Commerce has spent. So yeah, it'll leave deep cuts, but state lawmakers already set aside $15 million earlier this year in anticipation of HUD's new funding guidelines. There's no saying that state Democrats can't return and readjust their funding priorities. I mean, if the state's at risk of losing $60 to $80 million in federal permanent housing money, they could just talk about transitioning some of the almost $1 billion that they're spending on homelessness to fund some of those permanent housing gaps. They might say, look, housing first is on the way out. Oh no, but their documents say a different story. And it might be somewhat foolish of them to continue holding on to the housing first narrative, not because they don't believe in it, but because if they do that and refuse to change their policies, at least in terms of what they do with federal funding, it could result in them losing that funding altogether. Now, there's $60 to $80 million in federal continuum of care funding that is technically at risk for the state, but at risk just means it probably won't all go towards the same projects that they've renewed funding for year after year after year. Instead, the state is going to have to go after funding more transitional housing programs and other types of services that are tied to some type of participation in case management or other support services. The state could change its approach, but it's in their hands now. The changes that we'll have to follow over the coming months is where the federal government puts this money, because this funding application or this funding availability that came out in June from HUD is just the first step. Now all the different continuum of cares have to go out and apply for that funding, and then Congress has to award it. So this is just the first step of many that are ahead.
So for years, much of the money that HUD has spent on the federal level on mitigating homelessness has gone towards renewing these same permanent housing projects as taxpayer funding has increased and the homelessness and drug addiction crisis has only worsened on our streets. Depending on where you're watching this from and where you live, you see it in your own communities. It's undeniable. And it's not working, obviously. That's why the King County Regional Homeless Authority is under increasing pressure from the city of Seattle and the King County Council to prove their outcomes. Of course, they have either evidence of fraud or misuse of funds that is currently under investigation. And so now we've got this pressure coming from the federal administration as well, a huge about face from the direction we've taken on this problem for decades now. It's going to be, a dramatic change, and hopefully outcomes will be improved for those people that are really struggling. Now, we're less than 5 months until the November election. That is hard to believe, but it's true. And there are two key ballot measures already qualified that are going to be on your ballot. One is to restore parental rights with schools. They can't keep secrets from parents. If my child wants a different pronoun at school, you have to tell me. If my child is confused about their gender and seeking a counsel at school, I have the right to know. The other is to protect girls in sports and to keep biological males out of girls' sports. Now, Let's Go Washington is behind both of these measures. And the individuals who will author the pro and con statements, which you'll see in the voters pamphlet, have been approved now by the Secretary of State. So I spoke with Darren Littell with Let's Go Washington today. He said the statements, although some people might not read their voter's guide, it ends up in the recycle bin before you ever open it. There's a lot of people that don't pay attention to politics every day, maybe don't watch the news or they're not on social media. And that voter's pamphlet may well be the first time for many before they, when they receive an education about what these ballot measures are all about.
The statements actually come down to they're very important. A lot of people read them. We've done testing on it to see how many people read them and the kind of impact that it has on their vote. And people actually do a lot of research, which I think is good. I think that more informed people are when they go to cast their ballot, the better off they are. So, crafting these statements is a critical part of the election, and making sure that they're done well and factually accurate, I think, are really important pieces of it.
So it is Washington House and Senate leadership for each party that gets to offer up a name. And then on the con side, you also have groups like the Washington Education Association and Planned Parenthood who will be writing the con statements for both of those ballot measures for the voters' guide. One of them is a woman by the name of Courtney Normand, state director for Planned Parenthood. She's on the con list for both initiative statements. And there's also a school board member, a counselor, I should say, it's not a school board member, a school counselor for the Franklin Pierce School District. And I reached out to her, did reach her via email this morning, and I'm hoping to get an interview with her as to why she, wants to provide the con statement on one of these initiatives for voters. We're hoping to connect later today, and I will bring that to you in tomorrow's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. Either way, I'll be writing up an article on that to kind of share her perspective. In fairness, it's important to hear what she has to say as well. Now, we also know that the state and national teachers unions are heavily invested in convincing people to vote against the initiatives. There was a post on X from school choice advocate Corey DeAngelis, who wrote, teachers unions have already spent $423,000 to fight against protecting girls' sports and parental rights in Washington. The two initiatives will be on the ballot in November. NEA has apparently spent $250,000. WEA has spent $173,000. Now, Littell from Let's Go Washington shared that the voter pamphlet statements on the initiatives are different, of course, from the ballot titles and the impact statements on the initiatives that we will see on the ballot. Those are crafted by the state AG. And it's important to remember that in Washington, those statements are intended to be neutral. They should be, not swaying voters one way or the other. However, we have the state AG who has already publicly come out against both of the initiatives. So Littell and Let's Go Washington have a problem with that.
The Attorney General, the Attorney General has come out and said that he opposes the initiatives themselves. And so I think people can just ask themselves a question. If you are fundamentally against, the rights of girls to have their own sports, and if you're fundamentally against the idea that parents should be involved in their kids' school, and then you're asked, how would you write a statement about it, or how would you describe that? Are you going to be fair and neutral about it? And I think that people would come down and say, well, probably not. And so that's really the challenge. It's one of the challenges that we face with the Attorney General's office, being able to write the ballot statements and the impact statements and all that, along with the Secretary of State. These are people who are elected officials. They come out opposing these positions, and then they're asked to be nonpartisan and write them in a fair and balanced way. And I just think that anybody who's voting can understand that that might not be the best way to come about these. It's not that they use a bunch of bad language. It's that they write it in a manner that's so confusing that people can't tell if I vote yes for this, am I supporting this, or am I supposed to vote yes to vote no, or how does this go? And just confusing the voters intentionally. And the number of people that come to us and say, boy, I really wish you wouldn't have written it in such, confusing legalese language that we could have understand what it is that you guys are saying. My response is, look, we're trying to get these things passed. We would have loved to just say, hey, do you think that girls should be able to play sports? Do you think we should protect girls' sports and fairness in girls' sports? Do you think that parents have a right to know what's going on in their kids' schools? And just leave it at that, because that's effectively what these two initiatives are doing that are on the ballot right now. Is, do you think we should protect fairness in girls' sports? Do you think the parents have a right to know what's going on in their kids' schools? And when you ask it that way, people say, well, yeah, of course. Right. So then you would want to vote yes. But the way that they write it is just, it's a little confusing.
And we'll have more tomorrow from Let's Go Washington on the signature gathering numbers for yet another initiative that may well be on the November ballot. This is the one that hopes to repeal the newly passed income tax. They're out gathering signatures now. A couple of important deadlines for that. Let's Go Washington says any people that got mailed petitions to gather signatures on their own in their community, their church, their workplace, whatever, those need to be mailed back by June the 22nd. And then July 2nd is the deadline for Let's Go Washington to turn all of those in to the Secretary of State in hopes that they can qualify for the November ballot. They're trying to get somewhere close to 400,000. They don't need that many, but of course, you've got a lot of, voters that maybe sign twice, or they're not a registered voter and don't, have the right to sign. And so those signatures get tossed out. They may well be on track, though, to break records for any previous numbers of signatures turned in for one of their ballot initiatives. So more on that in tomorrow's episode of Washington in Focus Daily. So that's a wrap for this Tuesday, June the 9th. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll join us again tomorrow. Check out our Center Square Washington page. See you tomorrow.